Are you ready, children? Then let's begin. There once was an owl who sat in the tree. He looked and he looked to see what he could see. He saw a dog, then he saw a cat. Then he saw a little bit of this and a little bit of that. He looked and he looked all through the day, and he looked and he looked all through the night as his eyes grew wider at the things in his sight. Then he turned his head slowly, seeing something quite new, as his eyes opened wider, looking straight at you.
Owls have a fossil history that dates back 65.5 million years ago, placing them here on Earth at the time of the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. Myths and folklores have grown out of the ages, starting with the Greeks, depicting the owls as a symbol of wisdom. The Romans, who believed that the owl was a witch in disguise, would kill them, hanging them on doors for protection. Many Romans also believed that the owl's call was a sign of approaching death. From as far away as Japan to our own American Indians, owls have been seen as wise creatures being celebrated for their wisdom, intuition, and foresight. Today we look at the owl in a completely different way, and while some of the myths remain to this very day, we now know a lot more about the owls who reside in our forests, especially those who call Michigan their home.
The three most common owls in Michigan are the great horned owl, the eastern screech owl, and the barred owl. We have owls in the state of Michigan that do migrate. Snowy owls are probably the most common that we'll get here in the winter from the Arctic tundra and the boreal forests. A lot of them can be found in the Upper Peninsula and a lot of times in the northern Lower Peninsula. And when I say most common, they aren't necessarily easy to find.
So during the winter, we actually see more species of owls here than we do in this region during the summer. And that's because of owls like snowy owls, long-eared owls, short-eared owls, saw-whet owls. They all migrate down from further north to this part of Michigan during the winter time. So during the winter, snowy owls still aren't as common as your screech owls or your barred owls or great horned owls, but they can be relatively common, especially if you know where to look. They like to hang out near farms where you have open fields. They will like to hang out along bodies of water where they might catch ducks and things like that.
They're coming down because they're in search of food. They're in search of warmer climate. It may not seem warmer to us, but to them, when you're up in the Arctic tundra in the winter, it's slightly warmer here for them too. So mostly for eating.
In a year where they've had an eruption, which means that they had a really good breeding season, so they had lots of babies, and then a lot of these babies are getting pushed out of the territory during the winter time, so they're looking for somewhere to go, these juveniles. These years where we have an eruption like this, where we have a lot more snowy owls, they've seen them in Ohio, even all the way down to Florida, in the Keys one year. And a couple years ago, they saw a snowy owl in downtown Detroit on top of somebody's car outside the post office. So it depends on the year. It depends on how their summer breeding numbers were as to how many we see during the winter time.
Depending on the species, they're either nocturnal or crepuscular, so that means they're active like right at dawn and then again right at dusk. Some of them are nocturnal, they're active throughout the night. Others are more diurnal, so they're active during the day, like our snowy owls are active during the day. So the best time to see them or hear them would be in the evening to hear them calling. Hard to see during the summer with all of the trees on the leaves because, yeah, a lot of them do have camouflage to help them blend into their environment. One of the best ways, actually, if you're searching for owls during the day, is to look for larger birds like crows or jays. Even our smaller songbirds will mob or dive towards if they see an owl species, and that helps alert you that maybe you can find it.
So owls do have a breeding season, and a lot of the owls that we see here in Michigan will breed during the winter time. A lot of people are surprised to hear that because usually when they think of birds breeding, they think of springtime. But depending on the species, they'll start courting, calling to each other in November or so, November, October, and their breeding season will go throughout the winter into January, February, especially like the great horned owl.
Owls are birds of prey. They capture their food with their talons, very large talons, and then they either swallow them whole or they tear them apart into pieces.
So they'll eat things like mice, rats, snakes, squirrels. Barred owls like to eat things that they find in the water from time to time, like crayfish and fish. Great horned owls are one of the few predators of skunks. So skunks don't have many predators, as I'm sure you can imagine, because of that wonderful spray, that smell. But great horned owls are very powerful. They have very powerful feet, and the way that they hunt involves silent flight. So owls, when they fly, they don't make any sound. Their feathers are well adapted for silent flight. They're very soft. Compared to a lot of other birds, they have fringes along the edges of their feathers, so when they're flying, they don't make any sound. So the idea is that it would be able to sneak up on a skunk and grab it before that skunk ever knew what hit him.
They cannot digest the bones and the fur, so they spit them up in the form of an owl pellet. So often you can find owl pellets at the base of a tree. If you find an owl pellet at the base of a tree, look up. You might see the owl roosting there.
Along with its talons, sharp beaks, and the ability to fly silent, the owl has been equipped with other abilities that help it hunt its prey. One of those abilities, so it was thought for centuries, was that the owl could turn its head 360 degrees, not allowing anything to sneak up on it.
People say that owls can turn their heads all the way around, and that's kind of a myth. They can turn their heads a lot farther than you and I can, but they can't turn their heads all the way around. Their heads would likely fall off if they could turn their heads all the way around. You and I can turn our heads 180 degrees, so that's over one shoulder and over the other shoulder. Owls can turn their heads 270 degrees. So it may look like they're turning their heads all the way around, but they can't quite turn it all the way around. And they have a couple adaptations that help them with that. One is the number of bones that they have in their neck. Humans have 7 bones in their neck, 7 vertebrae, whereas owls have 14. So that helps them turn their necks farther. And then the way their blood flow goes through their spine and in, through the bones also helps them to turn their heads without passing out, right? Without pinching off that blood supply. The reason owls need to be able to turn their heads farther than we can is because while they have really good vision for seeing very far, and they have excellent night vision, they can see much better in the dark than you and I can, owls can't turn their eyes back and forth like you and I can. So their eyes are stuck facing forward. So our eyes are more rounded in the back. Owls' eyes are more like a tube in the back, and so they sit kind of into the skull, and they can't turn their eyes back and forth, so they need to be able to turn their heads a little bit farther than we can to help see around them.
Along with their camouflage and a keen sense of sight, the owl also counts on his ability to hear his prey yards away.
Owls have very good hearing. They hear much better than we can, which is one of the reasons we don't see them very often, because they hear us coming long before we would ever have a chance to see them. They have a lot of things about their hearing that help them. One of those things has to do with the location of their ears on their head. So our ears are symmetrical, they're straight across from each other. Most owls have asymmetrical ears. So one of them is higher up and one of them is lower down on their head. And that gives them more of surround sound. They also have feathers around their eyes that we call facial discs that are like satellites. And these facial discs collect sounds and send them back to their ears. So they have excellent hearings. It's so much better than ours. And so some of these owls that have to hunt in the snow, they can detect an animal moving around 1-2 feet underneath the snow and reach down and grab it. Owls are very important. They help control rodent populations. Of course, people don't like to have a lot of rodents like mice and rats around their house. So owls are also very important, and they're a natural way to control those rodent populations rather than using poisons or traps to catch them and try to move them. One of the bigger threats to owls, especially those owls that are well adapted to living around humans, are rodenticides. So using poisons to kill rats and mice, because the owls are going to eat those rodents that have the poisons in them, and then the owls will most likely die. So a lot of birds of prey, or even things like snakes, do not survive eating an animal that has been poisoned. So that's a big concern for owls, especially as they adapt to living around people. And that's why we encourage people not to use pesticides or rodenticides to take care of rodent populations around their house.
While enjoying a day at the Pine River Nature Center, you are up to see all kinds of woodland animals and birds. But it's important to follow the rules of the woods, especially if you are going to look for owls.
Birding is a pastime that many enjoy, and that also includes going out and looking for owls. So whenever you're birding or looking for owls, you want to make sure that you're giving them space. The best birding practices are to observe them from a distance. Use your car as a blind. Don't get so close that the bird knows that you're there. If you notice that they look nervous, if they keep looking away and then looking at you, looking away and looking at you, you need to back off a little and give that bird space, because we want the bird to know that you're not there so it can continue on with what it needs to do, whether it's resting during the day or hunting at night or actively seeking out a mate. So we want to make sure that we definitely don't overstep our boundaries.
For the last 65.5 million years, the owl has amazed those who have watched and studied it. Shown to be the wisest animal in films and children's books, the owl will maintain his mystique for years to come. So the next time you're outside on a cool, crisp evening, take a look up at the full moon. You may just see one of our Michigan owls flying by.